welcome. Today we're going to take a closer look at how to find a comfortable sitting position for your breathing and meditation exercises. You might notice that if you are sitting in any position for a long time, especially on the floor, you develop some pain in the back, and that could be annoying if you're trying to focus on comfortable, even breathing. So we're going to look at how to find a comfortable position using all of the props, and you can find the one that works best for you. But with all of the props that we're using, the principles involved are going to be the same. When we're looking for a comfortable sitting position, essentially what we're looking for is anterior rotation in the hips. If you were practicing cat pose and cow pose hips rolling forward is what we're after. So if that doesn't quite make sense in your body, then practice cat pose and cow pose a few times. Feel the forward and posterior rotation in the hips, and try to remember that when we're beginning a sitting pose, any kind of sitting pose, we're trying to begin with cow pose hips, anteriorly rotating hips. And that becomes a problem when we sit on the ground, because typically what tends to happen is as soon as we bring our knees in towards our chest, we begin to get posterior rotation. We end up sitting behind the sitting bones and taking more weight into the low back. So even if we work on bringing the knees down, we haven't quite gotten over the posterior rotation of the hips, and that makes everything else more difficult. So all of the work that we're doing with the props is to get the hips high enough that the hips can rotate forward enough, the knees and thighs can rest down to the floor and get a broader base of support. So starting with the blocks, you can use one block or two blocks depending on what you need. And what we're trying to do is to get the edge of the hips on the edge of the block, so they can begin to pour over the top, the edge of the block, and encourage that forward rotation of the hips. So at home you can try first sitting on the very top of the block, and notice that it doesn't really help. If you're in posterior rotation on the ground, chances are sitting on the top of the block in posterior rotation isn't going to solve any back pain you have. You have to get the pubic bone, the front of the hips, to reach down to the ground, the knees down to the ground, the hips to rotate forward so you can enjoy a natural and elongated low back. So practice with sitting on the very edge of whatever prop you're using to roll the hips forward, get the knees down, and enjoy a broad base of support. You can do this with one block or two blocks, whatever works for you. Get the hips high enough that you can actually get the knees down to the ground. It's the same deal if you're using a bolster. Sit on the very edge of the bolster to roll the hips forward and get the knees and thighs to reach down to the ground. Or alternatively, if you're more comfortable sitting in a kneeling position, the principle's basically the same. You want to get the hips high enough that the hips can rotate forward and the spine can lengthen through the low back. Here we're enjoying the same broad base of support, weight in the hips and the knees and the shins, not just on the back of the hips and the low back. You can use the same principles involved with the blanket, though if you are sitting on the edge of a blanket, you might not get the same amount of rotation through the hips. So I encourage folding the blanket to make it thick enough that you can actually get the hips to roll forward. Same principles involved, hips rolling forward, knees and thighs bringing down to the ground. This doesn't change whether you're sitting on the ground, on blocks, on bolsters, or in a chair. If you are sitting in a chair, make sure that you're setting yourself up with your shoulders over the hips. The temptation of sitting in a chair is to lean back and to relax, but here we have the same problem that we started with. Weight in the space behind the sitting bones, on the low back. Bring your shoulders over your hips. Rotate the hips forward to lengthen through the spine, and enjoy the same broad base of support, the feet, the thighs, and the hips. So there you have it, basic sitting practice for whatever kind of sitting breathing meditation you're going to do. Begin by starting and building a strong, broad foundation through the hips and the legs. Pull the shoulders over the hips, the ears over the shoulders, and keep breathing. Till next time.